Hi everyone, this is Soumyadip Paul, a mentor at CodeKerdos and a software developer at Amazon. And welcome to day 8 of our system design series. In the previous video, we saw what is latency and what is response time. We saw that response time is T1 plus T2 plus T3 and latency is T1 plus T3, where T1 is the time taken for the request to reach from client to server. T2 is the computation or processing time for the server. And T3 is the time taken for the response from the server to the client. Okay. Now in today's video, we'll be talking of how we can improve this response time and latency. So we'll talk about ways. Yeah. So we'll talk about ways to improve response time or latency. Okay. Let's see. And these are very, very common ways. And in any interview where you're talking about HLD, high level design, you need to know these things. Very, very important stuff. Okay. So ways to improve response time latency. So the very first way is something called as caching. Okay. The very first thing is caching. So if you have a server and your server is fetching some data from the server, your server is fetching some data from the database and it is a read heavy database, it is a read heavy feature and there are not frequent updates to the database. So it is a read heavy stuff, and not frequent updates. Okay, not frequent updates. In that case, if these two conditions are there, then what you'll do is between your server and your database, there will be something called as a cache. Okay. Usually it is a Redis cache, or if you want to have some other database acting as a cache, that is also completely fine. Okay. So this is what will act as a cache, where in case you have some data which is frequently not updated and frequently fetched, then you store the data in the cache memory, which is closer to the server, or most of the times inside the server's RAM itself. So fetching that data is very easy, very simpler, much faster than making some database calls. Okay. So this is the first way. The second way is, now don't worry, if you're not able to understand what caching is, don't worry. In the later videos, we'll understand caching in a much more in-depth way. We'll have specific videos only for caching. But in today's video, I just want to list a few ways and give short introduction about all those ways. Okay. So the second way, what is the second way? The second way is to have a CDN. Okay, what is a CDN? A CDN is nothing but a content delivery network. Again, don't worry, we'll have a separate video solely on what a CDN is. Okay, I'll explain you properly what a CDN is. But in today's video, I'll just give a quick introduction and just let you know that, hey, yes, CDN is something you can use to improve your latency, your response time. Okay, so content delivery network. Okay. So CDNs are also kind of caching systems, but not on the server side, not so close to the server, but on a geographic level. Okay, provided by different ISPs or big companies. There are CDN servers in place. So suppose I'm sitting here in India and I want to fetch some data from Google's server. Okay, and say Google's nearest server is in Mumbai. Okay, I'm here in say Bangalore and Google's nearest server is in Mumbai. Now, if I want some data, the API call will happen from Bangalore to Mumbai. But if there is a CDN somewhere in between, maybe in Pune or maybe in Bangalore itself, if there is a Google CDN or if there is a CDN by some ISP internet service provider like Airtel, Jio, etc., then if I am fetching this data, say this is a CDN, and if I'm fetching this data very frequently, then the CDN will have stored this data and CDN acts as a cache on a much bigger level. Okay. One thing, there is a cache on a smaller level on the server side, and then CDN acts as a cache on a much bigger level, which is closer to the users. Okay. So there is a normal cache which we talk about, which is placed between the server and the database. And then CDN is a cache which is placed between the user and the server. And it is close to the user. Okay. Some common CDNs are, say, Cloudflare, Akamai, a very, very common CDN. Amazon's CloudFront. Amazon's CloudFront. Very, very common CDN. Okay. The third way is database indexing. Again, don't worry if you don't know what indexing is. We will understand indexing very properly. How indexing works using binary trees internally, etc. But just in short, know that database indexing means that you index a SQL database on the basis of a particular key, and then the entire database gets restructured in the form of a binary tree across that key. So that fetching data, when you want to fetch data based on that particular key, the fetching happens in big of log n and not big of n time complexity. Okay. So indexing is a very, very important concept, and we'll study this when we focus on databases. That is why I'm not touching it right now. Okay. The next is reduce network calls as much as possible. Reduce network calls as much as possible. Okay. As much as possible. Okay. So you as a designer, as a software developer, you should design your system. You should design that flow of data between the client and the server in such a way that you need as less number of network calls as possible between the client and the server and other services server, between the server and the database. Think properly, reduce the flow of data in least number of network calls as much as possible. Okay, very, very important stuff, very important stuff. People, developers usually don't think around network calls. They keep on blindly making lots and lots of network calls to fetch data. But try to optimize this a lot. Okay, this is a very important concept. Then something called as use asynchronous processing. Okay. Use asynchronous processing. Now suppose you want to make an order in an e-commerce website. Okay. Or suppose you have successfully made an order, you have successfully made a purchase. So after that, probably some email needs to be sent, confirmation email that yes, your purchase is successful. An invoice needs to be generated. Some analytics may be needed to get updated. A response has to be sent to the client that yes, the purchase is successful. All these things can be happening asynchronously. Okay. They need not be happening synchronously one by one in a serial manner. They can happen parallelly. So what I mean by asynchronous processing is nothing but parallel processing. Okay. Parallel processing. So whenever you make an API call and you want to do a lot of database calls, or you want to do multiple things in that particular controller which handles for this API, you want to do multiple things in the server, then if they are independent of each other, you should do them asynchronously, which means parallelly, so that they don't occupy a lot of time. Okay. Then after this we have something called as what else? Yes, we can definitely use faster storage. Okay. Now you might be thinking, what is a faster storage? So usually, if you store your data in an HDD, then there is a latency of 5 to 10 milliseconds. If you store your data in the SSD, there is a latency of 50 to 200, but not milliseconds, microseconds. And if you store the data in RAM, the latency is only about 100 nanoseconds. So you see, RAM is the fastest. Then SSD is a little slower. Then HDD is the slowest. So based on the size of data you need, Suppose you have very small amount of data, and you're fine if the data gets lost by a temporary shutdown of the server. If you're fine with that, then it is best to store that data in RAM, because fetching data from RAM is the fastest. Okay. And then at last, what you should do is use efficient data structures and algorithms. Okay. Use efficient data structures and algorithms. Okay. Now, usually I see people hearing that, hey, I don't use data structures in development. I've never seen people use data structures in development. That is a complete false statement. Complete false statement. Please don't fall for that. If any person has not used data structures in development, they probably have not worked in good development projects where they have to build software for millions and millions of people to use. Anyone who has built software at scale for millions and millions of people to use, they literally have built softwares which need hardcore data structures, hardcore algorithms, very, very efficient algorithms. Okay. So be very good at data structures, and if you are building stuff which will be used for millions and billions of users, then focus a lot on using efficient data structures and algorithms for your software. Okay. So that's it for today's video. These are some 7 things that you should keep in mind to lower your latency, to lower your response time as much as possible. But don't worry, if you have not understood any of these concepts, don't worry. We'll have a separate video for caching. We'll have a separate video for CDN, content delivery network. We'll have a separate video on indexing. We'll have a separate video on what is asynchronous, what is synchronous. Okay. So that's it for today's video, and I'll see you all in the next video. And if you want to learn these concepts in a much more in-depth manner with practice and interview level training straight from the developers at MAANG companies, then do join CodeKerdos.